Okay, so I wanted to first of all start by asking you guys how giving you a little bit of feedback of the project overviews and seeing if you guys have any questions. But um, before I get into that, maybe to let a few more students join class, I did want to share a new information that I put in Canvas for you guys. Let me share my screen with you to make sure, and this is something I don't have to repeat later. I could just direct students over here. So what I did today was I actually created a module for you guys. I didn't create it, I actually added on to the existing module on APA style. I actually added some general writing resources for you guys, and I also added some information on an article review. And what I'll do is for each of the deliverables, if there's any resources I could share with you that I think might be helpful to you, I'll go ahead and add them in this module right here with a text separator, so you know what resources go with what assignment. I guess a general would go to any assignment. I was thinking more of the final project for the general writings resources, but like I said, I mean, this could be helpful to you in a number of different ways. So I'm not going to go into each one of these in depth, but like I said, since we're waiting for some more students to join us, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the paper structure. I got a good feel of what you guys were going to be writing about for the final project, but I did want to kind of just spend, like I said, we're lucky we have a few minutes now that we can just go over a couple of things for the paper structure. Some of you it's been a while since you've taken a writing class, so I hear ya. I just wanted to share, visually with you some of the resources I added on here. So just the basic essay structure to kind of refresh your memory. Of course, this might be like very elementary for some of you, but maybe read through it. This particular handout is pretty cool because it not only tells you the obvious, purpose of each section, but also gives you tips to start your paper, and then methods you can use if you have a hard time getting started. Maybe you have a writer's block come up to you, unexpectedly. There are there's a lot of different types of information in this particular handout for you. So that's why I added it on here for you in this module. And then what I did was I just added a few other resources on the difference between paraphrasing, summarizing, and quoting, when you should use each one. Again, some of you are doing position papers or even a scholarly paper. I mean, eventually, at some point in your writing, you have to, state an opinion, and of course provide evidence, even though it's not structured as an argumentative paper or that sort. But this particular handout, let me give it a second. The internet is lagging a little bit on my end, but tells you, kind of shows you, the basic components of what a position paper looks like, where, you need to state your position, where you want to state perhaps the opposing view. So, anytime now, and this finishes loading up. Of course, technology. So, the different elements of, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and move on to the next while that loads. Comparison and contrast. A lot of you, were trying to figure out how to compare, how to talk about teaching methods, or even if you're looking at a position paper, a comparison and contrast format is pretty easy to do, and it always works well with almost any type of paper you want to write. You can convert it into comparing two different research methods. Teaching methods, comparing and contrasting, and taking a position on one of the two. So it's a very flexible format. It's one of my favorite formats. I did include the APA sample scholarly paper. It used to be up here. I kind of just moved it down here. And then these are just a couple of old, good, trustworthy videos that I've been using for a long time to teach my writing courses. And it just kind of refreshes your memory on, how to structure the paragraph, when to incorporate the citations, how to properly incorporate a direct quote, when it's appropriate to use a direct quote, that sort of thing that, you just maybe just want to brush up on. These videos are probably less than 10 minutes. So you can watch them in, a couple of chunks, or however you you like best. And then these are just some sources for this week. I think this one's already loaded. So going back to the elements of persuasive argumentative papers, again, just if you're doing a position paper, things to consider, the refutation, the different components of it. So again, it's just some basic information for you guys. I did include some information on how to write an article review. I found a couple of decent sources online. So they're very good. So you guys, and we're going to go over that in a minute in the actual meeting. But so you're aware of some of the resources in here. And I do include a sample article critique, which is, it's pretty good. It goes through the different parts of the paper, and then a wiki how-to review, which is actually pretty decent. So those are there for you guys to, look over as we approach, the second half of our semester, and you're going to get ready to start writing that final draft, doing your outline, and those kinds of things. So I'm going to actually turn over my I'm sorry about that. Trying to minimize there we go. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting now officially with the presentation I have for you guys. So I'm going to share my desktop, and then I'm going to go ahead and let's get started. So this week, we're going to cover, we're going to expand on learning styles and learning preferences. As I said earlier, I did want to just kind of touch base with you about the module, the project overview. And let me open up my chat here so I could see you guys. Excuse me. Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted to see if you guys had any questions for me about the project overview. I gave you some feedback. I think everybody has great ideas. I think some of you are thinking kind of like a little bit too much information for short. This is a relatively short paper. So, if you were proposing looking at two different theorists, or, more than like maybe two research, I keep saying research methods, they go hand in hand, teaching methodologies, or teaching methods. I kind of said, just maybe focus on one primary method and then kind of sprinkle the other methods around. So that was my biggest, advice to, I think, a lot of you that were kind of like thinking big. I think as you start looking through your information and your research, you're going to start reading out those teaching methods, or those theorists, or those I guess psychological theories and scholars that you want to kind of like maybe use in the background or not use at all, and then focus on one particular person or concept or idea. So I just, I wanted to kind of leave it open. I guess, right now, if you guys don't have anything about the project overview, or you just want to look at the feedback, I went over them, I think, yesterday, just let me know and just email me. And like I said, if you need to go over anything or you want some further clarification, I'll be more than happy to talk to you about those things. So let me just move my little chat boxes around. I apologize. I lost one. There it is. Just trying to, whoops. Okay, so I guess I want to start with the purpose of the article review. So I want to spend a little bit of time on the article review, just over the basic components. So the purpose and the structure of an article review. An article review is basically your critique of someone else's work or someone else's ideas or someone else's publication. So you're actually going to be evaluating secondary source. So you should be looking at an article written about something else. So instead of looking at a primary source, for example, the experiments that took place with the early, behaviorists in the laboratory, and you're going to evaluate, that's primary research. So what you're going to be looking for is an article that actually critiques or talks about someone else's work, okay? And you're essentially going to just focus on providing a little bit of a summary, making sure that you talk about any strengths or weaknesses in that particular article. You're going to eventually focus on either the strengths or the weaknesses, depending on your opinion on the article. So that's also important to always bring the pros and the cons of every thing we look at. We look at it objectively, and then evaluate it in relation to your knowledge about the topic. So I know you're just starting on this topic. Hopefully you've been able to at least look at 3 or 4 other journal articles or readings or information in the course that will help you build a kind of like a background on the topic you're looking at, and you can talk about it in the article review. This article review is going to be part of your deliverable for the final paper. So whatever you submit to me can be revised and changed and added, and more stuff added to it as you incorporate it into the final paper. So this is just going to be kind of like, you're going to get a grade for it, but if you need to change it up, it doesn't have to be exactly what you submit when you submit it at the end. As a matter of fact, after looking at more information throughout the semester, you might actually want to update some of the information before you submit the final project. So in the body of the analysis, so the major part of the paper, you're going to be looking at, like I said, a couple of strengths, a couple of weaknesses, depending on which one you're going to focus on. You might want to look at, 3 good strengths and 1 major weakness. And then you're going to evaluate it and not necessarily summarize it, but choose those aspects that you really feel strongly about. So that's really, this type of work is 100% based on your opinion and your analytical abilities to kind of look at one article on a topic in relation to maybe 3 or 4 other ones, that are on a similar topic, and just kind of comparing. So you want to, obviously, when you're going to be critiquing this article towards the end, of the paper, towards the conclusion, you're going to actually relate the article to either relate it to your field of inquiry, or you're going to use it to actually support, an opposing viewpoint. So if you're doing a position paper and you found an article that you're actually using to critique and, say that it's, not a good approach, or you're going to be looking at it kind of negatively, then you might be able to, turn that and see how that relates to your topic, your field of inquiry, so your side, what you're supporting. So, and of course, evidence here, when you do the article review, when you critique it, you want to bring in, whatever other articles you're using to kind of as the foundation for your background information on how you're going to, so whatever you're using to kind of shape your existing knowledge, quote unquote. And you're doing this at a very fast pace, so the existing knowledge is growing by every second probably. Then you're going to relate that article to what you already know about the topic, and then go from there. So, like I said, put a couple of good handouts in the Canvas course for you. And if I find anything else, or if you find anything that you find helpful, please, by all means, share it in that open forum with your classmates. I'm sure that they would appreciate it. Okay, so I guess the major components of this module are learning techniques as well as teaching techniques, but I think your focus is more on learning. So we're going to look at the learning styles and the theories around learning and how we learn. And then for next week, which we'll talk about at the end, next week is going to be a lot of kind of like in-depth look at what we looked at the very first week. Actually the second week, last week. So last week with Thorndike and Dewey and all our different theories that we kind of looked at, we're going to revisit those next week. So tonight we're going to focus on the different types of learning techniques. So I just kind of summarized a few of the slides that were in that long PowerPoint volume of slides that you had in your module for this week. So just briefly, just going over the basic, the different types of things we use in the classroom to convey knowledge or to teach students. We use case methods. That's used a lot in business. That's used a lot in the medical field. Well, it originated in the oral tradition, storytelling. I reference the Bible in this case because sometimes this case method were, shared as a story to kind of teach somebody a lesson, or to kind of bring people together, or insofar as a prediction of things to come, a parable. So those are all the origins of what we could look at as today as the classic case study. The Socratic dialogue, as instructors and trainers and teachers, we use this every day. Basically, you shout out a question to the class, kind of like when we have our reflection questions. Well, what do you guys think about this? and then the students answer, calling out answers here and there. Sometimes they might raise their hands, if they're little and they're cute and they're still like not being rebellious. But so for the most part, we've used that. I think most of us at some point introduced debate or the idea of defending your opinions with facts and statements and those sorts of things. We incorporate that into, I think, our daily teaching when we ask students to give reasons why they, wrote a certain answer or, justify a response to a question, that sort of thing. And then the monastic or the Roman Empire kind of thing, the Holy Roman Empire, sorry, not the Holy Roman Empire, there's two, the Holy Roman Empire when the Vatican, took over, and during the monastic, medieval times, and then after during the, 17th century and onward, that whole idea of listening to the priest or the nun delivering information to us and we remembering and learning it almost like we're reciting our if you pray or whatever if you're spiritual, whatever your mantra is, you kind of memorize that and you just say it. And that's pretty much the foundation, fortunate or unfortunate, of our educational system today. And of course, that focuses specifically on the teacher or the subject matter expert. Students traditionally have very little interaction or say in what they learn. And this unfortunately happens also with adult learners. I'm sure you've all taken classes at some point, maybe in your undergraduate, studies, when you have a professor that kind of preaches what he or she, thinks, and you don't, may not necessarily agree, but you just don't want to offend him or her. So that sort of thing. Any type of teaching that puts the student at a disadvantage or as a subordinate to the teacher. And then you have different learning models. Do you learn as a group or in a society, or do you learn through individual methods like the developmental stages and so on and so forth? So essentially, the autonomous model posits that instead that literacy is a social practice, so that we learn how to speak and communicate as a society, and not necessarily linguistic skills or literally biological technical skills of our tongue position and all that stuff for pronunciation. It's about knowledge, the ways that we address people, the way we read and write and interpret things on our own. So those are essentially the different categories for learning. And then a couple of the two streams of inquiry. One of them, a couple of them we talked about last week. I'm really happy we spent some in-depth time on some of these theories, because the next couple of weeks are going to really kind of like just be a good review for you guys insofar as who thought what. But basically, the scientific versus the artistic, we still see that dichotomy in higher education today, especially when you do undergraduate, you do all your general education courses, art courses, typically your first 2 years, and then the second 2 years you're dedicated more to your specific trade or major. And if you happen to be an art major, then you really don't touch sciences or maths after your second year either. So I mean, it goes both ways. It's not taking sides over one for the other. But so the scientific method, or scientific form of inquiry, alludes to Thorndike and connectivism. And remember, the connectivism is basically learning through discovery and our ability as individuals to form associations with stimuli in the environment and our response to those stimuli. So I think we talked about habits and Pavlov's dog and those types of things that are, I think of connectivism as how we're directly connected to the environment we live in, and we respond and we reply to things and we act, whether it's driving or whatever it is, we behave and kind of react sometimes to a stimuli. Somebody cuts in front of us, we want I wish I had a bumper car, right? That kind of thing. And then the artistic by Lindemann, of course, he was influenced by John Dewey, which viewed knowledge as arising from active adaptation to the human organism, to its environment. Okay, so the one thing about artistic streams of inquiry is I just think of one thing. Back in the Greek times, the Greeks believed in a separation of mind and body and soul, or mind and spirit. So what Dewey does is he completely rejects that, and Lindemann as well. They reject that idea that our minds and our spirits are disconnected. They believe that we are one entire being, that our mind and our body is connected, which I think is how we see life today, and work balance and life balance and all that, stuff that we read about every day in magazines and work trainings and things like that. So this is again taken from our slides, just the evolution of adult ed. We can see that the majority of theorists and following really focused on more the scientific stream. And I'm gonna, if I remember to do this, if not, please remind me. I don't know if you've heard. I think I wrote this on a couple of your initial posts. Week one, there's a TED Talk presenter called Sir Ken Robinson, and he has the most amazing lectures or presentations on education and how education completely turns off the creative mind. And his theory is when we're kids, we have so much ability to do so many things, and then as we progress through school, we're allowed to be creative less and less, to will become kind of like robotic. And here we see, in plain view, using bullets, how this is very much how our education system has evolved, with a focus on more of a scientific stream. So a little more in-depth look at Edward Lindemann. He believes that education, insofar as education, adults are motivated to learn as they experience the needs and interests. So education at 25 is different from education at 30, is different from education at 40. Coming back to school in your 20s, or continuing school in your 20s, or coming back to school in your 30s, or even coming back to school in your 40s is very different. And you want to take out of your education different things based on what stage in life or where you are in your life. So learning is life-centered. We tend to want to learn things that can benefit us in some way, whether it's professionally or personally. Experiential knowledge, I think we've all read that. The need to be self-directing, the ability to give you choice, the ability to give you direction, and of course the differences that we experience and so far as aging is concerned. And then life beyond the classroom. It needs to be, education should happen at the same time with life. It should not be different. It should be relevant, okay? So it's lifelong learning. It's a very contemporary idea that we read about often in magazines and self-help books, lifelong learning, the idea that learning doesn't end after school or ends at the classroom. Again, it should revolve around all the time, at every step we take, everything we do has to relate it, we should learn something from it, however small it is. And then we should definitely look to our own experiences as the most valuable resource in anything that we put ourselves to, academically or professionally. This slide is rich in context, so I'm going to try to kind of break it down for you as best I can. So basically, we've seen this in the last couple of weeks, the important contributions from psychology, philosophy, and some of the social sciences, history, and some of the social psychologies as well. So clinical psychology, a lot of you like Carl Jung. I absolutely adore Carl Jung. I believe I like his philosophy better than Freud. I'm not a psychoanalyst at heart. I think I'm more Jungian, but it really talks about the 4 functions of human consciousness according to Jung. And Jung believed that consciousness is comprised of 4 aspects, right? Our consciousness is comprised of how we think, how we feel, how we inside, meaning like in our hearts, how we feel with our hands and our perception, and then how we think about feeling, our intuition. And a long time ago, and we'll probably get into this maybe next week, in the beginning of the 1700s, where rationalism and empiricism and those types of philosophies came out from Germany and England, primarily, I believe. They always put sensory knowledge or epistemological knowledge, or knowledge that you gathered through your senses and by seeing observation, seeing evidence, was really the only type of knowledge. They really doubted the ability of us to be able to intuit. And to intuit is be able to determine something or find facts in something from basically thinking about it and resolving or solving the problem or critically thinking about it. So that was really, that whole dichotomy. Jung kind of put those two things together, like mind and body. Again, this whole idea that, the idea that we could learn something without actually experiencing it physically in the physical world. Talks about the 8 ages of man. Again, we talked about this with Erik Erikson, the stages of development from babies, um, from 0 to 1. It's called the trust versus mistrust stage. The baby gets to know his parents, gets to listen to their mom's voice or dad's voice, and trusts those that are in his family. From 1 to 3 years, they learn how to be on their own, experience shame, doubt that they can get things done. Between 3 and 6 years, roughly, the initiative versus guilt. In other words, learning to plan and actually achieve goals. So when you have your little kindergarten come and say, "Mommy, I'm gonna get all 5 of the answers right." That's where they're getting into the age of like wanting to have actual goals and meet those goals. Then from 16 to 12, and when I was reading this, because, you read these, when you're planning for class or you're kind of like putting it in your conscious, removing it from your subconscious, you realize that, why teenagers are so difficult, or preteens, adolescence is so difficult. And that's the fourth stage, industry versus inferiority. So that's the age, 6 to 12 years old, when kids begin to really compare themselves with each other. Well, this is what Susie's doing it, so why can't I do it? And they begin to acquire a sense of pride, but also a sense of not, of low self-esteem. So that's why they're like sponges during this time. And then after that, they finally, start to create their own identity between 12 and 18, high school years, middle school, high school. And then they really start to think about themselves as little adults and what they want to, do when they finish. And then after that, between the ages of 20 and 40, we get married, we share our lives with others, and then at the end of our lives, plus 40, this is very sad for me, but I'm looking at it in a positive way. We try to figure out, what we've accomplished in life, what we want to leave behind, what for our children. So even that, so we're constantly thinking about, ourselves and learning in relation to our environment. The idea that clinical psychology really put the student first, or student centeredness. That was a concept that came from the idea of clinical psychology, listening to the patient, making sure that it's about the patient, ways to treat the patient in different ways. Everybody's different. Then our contributions really briefly from developmental psych, Piaget, Freud, Erikson, again, going back into the lifespan change stages of learning. So it's very similar to clinical psychology with just a few different nuances. Social psych, of course, is a study of human thoughts, behaviors as it relates to the people around us and how we function in society. So there's a term called collaborative cognition or groupthink. Some of you may have heard that. The idea that, culture in a company, for example, it's groupthink, the way that, you believe in certain things in that company, or the mission of that company, or the vision, or the school, whatever it is, on the idea that we function together as a group with a common, goal. Philosophy as it relates to education, I just kind of wanted to show you a list. This is by no means a comprehensive list. Honestly, I got this from Wikipedia, as you can tell, but I do just want to point out a couple of names on here. Those of you that are more into the spiritual aspect of education or the theoretical aspect. I mean, some of these thinkers were really, if you want to read a primary source, I mean, these are the guys, mostly guys. Unfortunately, I think they're all, yeah. I used to think Michelle was a woman, but no, Foucault was a guy, when I was in college. So just to name a couple of them, obviously I mentioned Plato, the whole mind-body dichotomy. You can see that in the early psychologists and how they tried to diagnose people's behavior and why we did certain things. Immanuel Kant, that whole idea between rationalism versus intuition. Kant was a German rationalist. He believed that there was no such thing as intuition, or what he called a priori knowledge before the fact. It's literally what it means, and it's knowledge that we acquire before we ever experience anything. And midway through his life, he changed that. He originally thought that there was no such thing as intuition, and then as he grew older and he became more spiritual, he changed his view to actually say that it was very possible to intuit something and know it enough to be a fact in our life. So Kant is extremely important to education, and that break in education that we see in the, or I guess, 50s and 60s. Hegel, he's the philosopher who influenced Karl Marx and Lenin and a couple of the other communist philosophies out there. He believed in the dialectic, or the thesis and antithesis, theory of opposites, different ways of looking at that. And of course, Aristotle, John Locke, which we all know of as a founder, of kind of founding father of our constitutional rights and beliefs, and in light of his ideas, we came up with, or the forefathers came up with the idea of preserving, people's basic rights and abilities to be happy and procreate and all that good stuff. Scholasticism, John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, which is basically an interpretation of the Bible through the eyes of Satan. It's pretty interesting and fascinating work. If you haven't read through it, it's very, very, very interesting. And then, of course, St. Thomas Aquinas, who's a staple in our Catholic religion. And then the end, I would just leave you with existentialism, Sartre, and some of the philosophers out of France in the 1960s and 70s. That whole idea that personal philosophical inquiry takes place as a starting point of the human subject. So it starts with us as human beings, and not merely as subjects, but as acting and feeling and living humans. And the one time that we actually understand our humanity is when we're confronted with something that puts that humanity at risk, whether it's an accident or just a problem in our life that we just feel like we're not strong enough to overcome. So those moments of true, trial are the ones that are really the ones that make us who we are, according to existentialist philosophers. Hull's three types of learners. Cyril Hull wrote a book, The Inquiring Mind, and in that book, he gave society a pretty in-depth look of adults and their motivation. So here's the first time we actually hear of a psychologist, philosopher that actually took motivation as one of the basic, components of learning. And he was also the guy that brought in that first word, not the first guy, but one of the first, believers of objectives, and making sure that students and teachers always knew what they were in for that day, what they were going to come out of the lesson with. So again, those objectives that we have to do so often in education. And then making sure that we find the circumstances of learning and a meaning which has no necessary connection with the content or purpose of the activity. So the idea that, yes, your purpose in this class is to make sure that you understand how to do research, understand research in the library, and how to put an article together, an article review, but it's also the ability for you to think about and ponder and analyze given educational situation or time period, and be able to think critically about it. So again, it's activity based, but it's also looking beyond the actual activity with the purpose, the larger purpose of the activity. And then again, the fact that we seek knowledge for our own sake. So Hull found that all the adults he interviewed, basically he conducted in his book, he conducted many interviews, and they had three basic learning orientations. They were all goal-oriented, activity-oriented, and learner-oriented. So these three types of learners he gathered from his years and years of studies with his own, his own interviews with learners. So just to take a little break from my voice, just wanted to see if there's anything that's happened thus far this week. I know it's only Wednesday, but think of a situation that clearly illustrates pedagogy and one for andragogy. So maybe compare, you can compare something we're doing in this class to something your nephew or niece, or so if you guys just want to share something, I did allow you to unmute yourself. I'm going to move my window. Let me see. I think I can see you guys. All right. So does anybody, my window is stuck between two monitors, actually. It's kind of weird. I'm trying to move it over, but anybody have anything to add? You should be able to unmute yourself. No? Okay. I'm trying to, give me 1 second. I'm gonna have to do this because I can't move. There we go. I'm sorry about that. Okay. I just couldn't see the whole chat window, so I couldn't see if you were speaking or not. All right, so let's move along. I guess you guys were not in the mood for sharing. I get you. I get you. All right, pedagogy versus andragogy. So again, I think we can pretty much talk about this with our eyes closed. Teacher content and pedagogy, of course, lesson plans. We see this in elementary and low and secondary, primary and secondary education. Everything has to be scaffolded. Everything is put into units. Everything is given to students in the most efficient way. Fortunately, sometimes that means teaching to the test. So again, the teacher is completely in charge of what goes on in the classroom, what's read, what's viewed on film, whatever the case is, versus student-centered process, which is more andragogy, which is for, let's say, me, the instructor, to think about what you need first. Let's say I have to get through this, but let me see what they need first. That's why you start off a meeting, for example, with a Q&A, with some clarification points, with some housekeeping, to make sure that everybody starts off on the same page. Again, we're going to talk about learning environment in a little more detail a little bit later on, but make sure that you hold a meeting in a place that has plenty of light. You give breaks, you have water, you have some snacks, some sugar, to get people, kind of like when they're dozing off, to get them involved. Again, mutual planning, making sure that everybody brings their laptops, or everybody has the devices that they need. Or again, it's not just, when you say, it's when everybody can make it. And then, of course, there's always a need for tangible learning objectives, not rigid learning objectives, but the idea that, you as an adult learner can pretty much, if I tell you by the end of this course, you're going to be able to um, develop a training program with adult learners in mind and focus on motivational factors, which is a general objective. But by the time you're done with this course, you should exactly be able to do that. So, while it's not rigid insofar as how you're going to be able to do that, by turning in a paper, by doing a group read, whatever the case is, it's still a goal of the class. And of course, designing the learning experience. And that's as a designer and as a professor, that's my job, to make sure that the information that you're getting in Canvas is presented in a neat way. I mean, that's, sometimes as trainers or instructors, we're so focused on content, we really need to focus a little bit more on design and delivery. If I give you a Canvas course, and I'm sure maybe you've taken online courses previously at other schools or maybe in other programs, the professor loads like 15,000 attachments, to a module, instead of having a clear breakdown of the module. All those things help learners be effective and be successful in a course. Of course, learning environment, ecological factors, sociological factors, making sure people are sitting close to each other, in a circle or in small groups. Again, making sure you're addressing their needs, making sure that the students get a sense of order, hence, an agenda, bullet points of things that are going to be covered, a meeting schedule, those types of things. Make sure, professors that kind of send announcements to you, like I like sending announcements to you. I don't want to, overburden you, but it's important to keep in connection with you. I share myself as much as I can with you, give you lots of examples, get to know you, bring that human aspect to learning. And then I think one of the most important things that I always have to remind myself, and I want to remind you guys, is I as a parent too, avoid rewarding to control. Avoid, and I try to do this as a professor. I try not to, to make sure my students are doing well in my class, give them, 3 or 4 extra credits to make sure that, the class looks good on average, so that I look good as a professor, that sort of thing. Or even as a parent, where, if they don't do this, you're going to take their iPad away, or they're not going to be able to watch TV. So it's hard to fall into that, but then, if you think about it, it's kind of like being bullyish, like you're kind of controlling someone else based on what you can give them. So I know it's an extreme, but maybe think about it objectively next time, you're with your kids or with your students, reward, sparingly, but importantly, and significantly, and not too often, because then, they take it for granted. It's important to work towards something. Avoid judging. I thought, this idea of anonymous grading might be something that we might want to bring in to reduce that whole idea of, bringing in our own bias into the classroom, trying to be objective. Again, that whole idea of inclusivity, making sure we take into account the learners' backgrounds, gender, identity, race, culture, all that good stuff. Gamification, make sure to incorporate a flexible learning environment where you have maybe little competitive activities or one competitive activity so students can feel, engaged. And of course, be open to other people's knowledge and experience and how they can always, offer feedback or input into your plans for the day or plans for the training. And I love this. I worked at the Art Institute in Miami for 7 years as a department chair, and I have zero artistic inclination, but I was lucky to be able to interact with a lot of students that were non-traditional in more than one sense. Obviously, they were all adults because they were in college, but they were non-traditional learners in the sense that these guys were animators, they were designers, graphic designers, computer, software engineer. I mean, audio engineers, like, that type of, architecture, very different from traditional, business or, English and, teaching education. So, and there was an entire class on the psychology of color for the interior designers specifically and for the animators and, when they're designing environments. So this really does have an entire amount of a body of knowledge and just scientific data. So, I mean, if you're looking for kind of a topic you want to focus on and you want to do something that's like something different, maybe consider, the learning environment, So just a couple of requirements you see there, the, ventilation, refreshments, bathroom. Obviously, those are all the things that you need as the basic components, but we go into a little bit more depth. Let's look at color. When you go to a doctor's office, you're never going to have, fuchsia or red walls or orange walls. Are always going to be light blue or a pastel color, something bright, something light. They always say, when you're setting up tables, for example, the layout, of course, you guys know, should be round. Even as students, we hate sitting in a classroom setting. We'd rather have the professor kind of in a conference room setting, or if you're lucky enough to have a class in a conference room, that's great. It's kind of interesting to kind of have how that dynamic changes. That might be something you can look at, excuse me, too, is the dynamic in the layout, and how students interact. So just a couple of fun facts. Color has been used to create feelings of coziness and spaciousness. Blue is the top choice for 35% of Americans, followed by green, 16%, purple, 10%, and red, 9%. So just some fun facts. A preference for blue or green may be due to a preference for certain habitats. So if you think about the beach, or I always think about the forest when I want to relax, or a mountain, blues, greens, earth tones, that's what we see when we look out, in the horizon. So maybe we feel like more close to nature. So that's also a possibility. Maybe color preferences depending on ambient. People, I mean, I prefer kind of cooler temperatures. So I like, more like cooler colors, like blue and green, but maybe you guys prefer warmer temperatures, like warm colors, like red and yellow. So it really does make a difference, and it really does, talk about who you are inside, what kind of personality you have, or what your preferences are. And then another fun fact, research has concluded that women and men respectively prefer warm and cool colors. So women tend to prefer warm colors, and men tend to like cool colors. So again, if you're doing maybe a gender focused group, and you have control over, the colors, you might want to throw in maybe some red roses, or some red carnations, or some pretty orange, whatever, some different colors. But Carl Jung is really a founding father of stages of color psychology. He was interested in colors, the properties and the meanings, as well as just his, the art and the art of potential, the potential of art to be a tool. I'm sorry for teaching. And he really liked Picasso. A couple of fun facts from Jung, and the way Picasso used colors and the effects of colors to kind of cross over, different times period. He had his blue era, he had his more modern, had his modern, uber modern era. So, Picasso's stages, and you see that if you study art, you see that the artist changes and evolves, so does his or her, selection of topics and colors. So the human learning, the learning climate, human slash interpersonal. Again, this is a concept of the social climate is closely related to classroom climate and school climate. Again, I guess represents how students in the school behave. Interpersonal relationships, student-teacher relationships, peer relationships. So anything that's interpersonal, meaning between two people. Intra, in case you guys forget, intra is within yourself. So intrapersonal is a conversation you have with yourself and your understanding, and interpersonal is between different people. Another few other concepts relevant to the study of human, social climate. The ability to be self-efficacy, meaning that we are resourceful and we can find the explanation to problems. We are open to questioning. We like being challenged, and we really appreciate honest feedback. And it's interesting, and if you look at it from a pedagogical perspective, and I found this interesting as well. If you, and I'm not sure if some of you are teach or having elementary children, or you work in elementary school, you work with, secondary, primary students. The classroom environment is a huge catalyst in children's behavior and behavioral issues. They found over and over again, and I think that's the same with adults. If you change the adult, through a different classroom, or you have a substitute teacher, or you miss a day of class, things kind of go out of whack. And this is especially true in children, and that's how they found teachers that were ineffective versus those that were effective, by looking, at these types of classroom environment and how the kids and the teachers and the kids interact as well. Personality theorists, again, emphasize a mentally healthy climate, again, respect for cultural differences, anxiety levels controlled, kind of like in the beginning of our term, I kind of set the pace. I want us to have an open and inclusive, group of colleagues, and our conversations are open. We have, from the humanistic psychologist, the idea of that's where we get human resources. I always think of that when I hear the humanistic psychologist. And as human resources folks or managers, we want people to feel safe in a caring environment, be able to trust us, come to us for help, and then just expect us, as human resources folks, to actually helping them find that adult in the room kind of thing that we so often need when we're lost, or there's chaos, or there's change happening in our life, or in our companies or schools that we work at. So human resources, again, for that whole humanistic psychology, the reward system is important here. Behaviors are rewarded if they're good behaviors, if your bosses or your managers want you to continue that. You have the HRD program support, again, to make sure that organizational goals and personal goals are met. And then the climate, dictates mechanistic roles of training. So does your organization have a formal or an informal training, department? And how is the organization structured? Is it more hierarchy, top down, or is it more lateral or more organic, as they say, where people are working together next to each other in a lateral instead of a vertical? So, a horizontal versus a vertical. Again, just a couple of things to remember as human resources consultants. We serve as advocates. We stimulate people insofar as professional development, getting on board with things, self-esteem, employee morale, those types of things. And we're essential for any change that happens in an organization. The objective of us as human resources or personnel or managers is to really improve the organization's mission and goals, but also to really spend time on development of people. And this is a huge market now for training and development folks. So if you're in the program and because you want to work in higher education, this is going to be something huge, training and development. If you have to work with training departments or HR departments or other managers, that's like the trend that we're going to see very, become more funded and more respected within organizations, smaller organizations, because huge organizations like Deloitte and some of the big finance companies and banks, they have a very structured, training and development that they invest millions of dollars in. But more and more universities are investing in instructional designers, in teaching and learning centers, and those sorts of things. So keep that in mind. And for future goals, that might be a niche that you can kind of get into in your own area of expertise. Learning needs, gaps assessment. Make sure that the employees in the company are on the same page. Make sure that the company is asking an employee to meet X amount of sales a month, that the employee has the tools to meet that amount. And sales is the best and easiest example I can use in this sense. Have the learners, not only you conduct a needs assessment on the a SWOT type of thing, but also have them assess themselves. And often this happens in a performance evaluation. You'll have a self-assessment, and then your manager will assess you, and then you kind of talk about it together and come to like some kind of agreement. And then, of course, as the human resources person, this is a type of meeting we have with the employee, or if there's skills that need to be worked on, so that's our job as well as managers and HRD people. Okay, quickly, learning needs assessment. Again, of course, it's the vehicle for determining, what's the desired behavior, if the employees are behaving or doing the things that the company expects them to do, and do they know they need to do these things? Sometimes a company is like, well, we expect you to know this, and the person doesn't really know, and it happens in every company and education all around. It's just make sure that everybody's on the same page and working towards the same objectives. And then, of course, our performance and our competencies in those situations where we need to go to a conference, or we need training, or we need to learn a particular software, or be trained on a new tool we're using at home or work. And then, of course, build those assessments and those training needs and programs, not only with the organization's goals in mind, but, the society, the individual. What kind of culture is it? If it's a more digital culture with folks in their 20s, maybe early 30s, training might be better in a form of a game, for example, instead of sitting in a room for 8 hours. So again, taking the society, the culture, and the society of a company, as well as the goals and the individual goals and the organizational goals, into account when designing training and lesson plans, I guess, if you're a teacher. And then, of course, writing objectives. This is a heavy infographic. It's focused on quality matters. This is one of their, one of their resources they put out to the public insofar as writing measurable objectives. So, I mean, this is a good little handout to have. I have it. I actually have the PDF, but again, you can always just take a screenshot and just save it. You can also just probably Google this, quality matters, writing measurable learning objectives. This might come up. So just let me know. I have all these in PDF if you guys want me to post them in an open forum. Just post a question and I'll reply. But this is for your information. It's a little bit similar to the learning wheel, the Bloom's wheel last week, which Scott, I think you shared it with everybody. Thanks a lot. This is a little bit more focused on writing the actual objectives versus, what objective, what verb meets the end deliverable. So again, we're using verbs here, and we're using concrete measurable verbs and objectives. But down at the bottom, I really like the alignment table that you see there, the alignment map, for those of you that are actively working on a new course or a new lesson or whatever it is that you need this for. This is a great little tool here for you guys to use. And then wrapping up some different views of objectives. These are just pretty much what each one of these types of believers, I guess, believes the behaviorists, they're meaningless unless they're you can see somebody doing them. Um, you Cognitive means like overall, like overarching, that the objective is not just one specific thing, but various things. Then there's people, that find a problem with writing objectives altogether and that they reject that altogether. And we'll look at a few of the reasons why. And then, of course, in the andragogy, the problem with giving you objectives, and you guys are taking this course, and this course is extremely structured to be very, pedagogical or andragogical, in the sense that you have your objectives and they're all measurable and you're all doing this stuff and I can see the stuff you're doing, but is that hindering your ability to be creative? That's a question that we can think about. So some problems with outcomes-based learning is that it assumes that learning can be accurately predicted and assessed. So that's one problematic. So that kind of like a predestination idea that you're going to predict what things are going to happen instead of letting them happen. It also, one other issue is that it may assume that all students should be learning the same thing. And as we all know, we're all at different levels, especially at the undergraduate or even the secondary level in high school. Not everybody is on the same level. Not everybody necessarily can learn the same thing, even though they're supposed to be able to, based on the curriculum, based on the grade. It just doesn't happen. Another problem is that it may assume that the things all students are pushed to understand is worth understanding. So the idea that, that objective focuses on one aspect that may not seem too relevant to some students, while it may be relevant to other students, or worth their time even understanding. It also assumes that that students can all master or really meet that objective right from the beginning without giving them a chance. And just plain old that outcomes-based learning is not human-based or inquiry-based. It's kind of like the end product is what it is. So there's no kind of like subjectivity, in the sense that the student is involved in determining the outcome at all. So in a nutshell, in seeking to standardize this knowledge, we've standardized the one thing that can't possibly be standardized at all, which is human understanding, which is pretty much what they believe, these folks that are against learning objectives. So most folks kind of fall in the middle. There's a time and a place for a learning objective, and then there's a time and a place where you need to modify one. So I think that's pretty common. And then again, designing a pattern of behavioralism. Again, we're going to talk about this next week in module 3. So it's more, the perspective on operant conditioning, behaviorist, making sure that focuses on the consequences of a behavior and not effect of that behavior over time. If you're doing something right, you get a reward. If you're doing something wrong, you get punished. Kind of like operant conditioning. The cognitive and inquiry theorists, like Piaget, suggested that an adult's role in helping the child learn was to provide appropriate material so the child can interact and use and construct. So he really was a proponent of the Socratic method, getting children to reflect and talk about their ideas. So I guess he also believed in the whole idea of like learning starts with stages, and you go from an inexperienced learner to a master learner as time progresses, and you acquire more knowledge. Then we have Freud as part of that cognitive inquiry and theorist in there. The id for Freud is the most primitive of the 3 functions, and it seeks to avoid pain. The superego is our moralizing force, and then the ego is kind of like mediates between morals and wants, and I guess the ego is our guide towards living a healthy and safe life in society. And then what they call third force psychologists, again, that whole learning environment. We think about environmental psychologists, existentialists. Environmental psych is an interdisciplinary field. It's not only about nature and the environment. It also talks about interplay between individuals and their surroundings, and their natural surroundings, but also their built surroundings, classrooms, buildings, the color the house is painted, how that affects you inside it, the whole idea of not having a window in jail cells, those types of things. So actually the actual design of a structure and how that affects learning and student acquisition of knowledge. So here's one more reflection question. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of skip over that because it's already after 10. And I think this is the next to the last slide. About the last slide is program evaluation. These are Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation. Again, level 1 through level 4. We have level 1 as the degree to participants find the training favorable. So their initial, we like it, we don't like it. So this is conducted after either a class or maybe midterm or final or at the end of the term. So do they like it? Did they have fun? And then the second level is, how did they learn? Did they get this? Did they acquire new skills? Did they learn how to write better? Did they learn how to research better? Did you get to explore at this level? So the degree to which the participants actually were engaged in the learning. So that's the second level. The third level is the behavioral level. And at that behavioral level, the degree with what they learned during the training. So the actual activities that you guys did for them, the activities that were prepared for them, and the, how they actually completed and their behavior during the completion of these activities, and the evaluation of knowledge that they acquired. Sometimes through a pre-post test, sometimes through a kind of like Q&A, sometimes you do a poll now, you take a poll. So anything to gauge, what they actually liked that they were doing, the activities, physically doing the activities. And then 4, of course, the results. The results of the training. This is usually the evaluation that takes place, a few weeks after, or maybe 4 months after. It depends on what type of training. So this is after the fact. This is so when you go back and you redo the training for the next time around, you take away best practices and you modify the training to make it better for the next coming groups. And then the last content slide for this evening, and of course our differences affecting young adult learning. And we're going to talk about the next module. Again, it's going to be a review of a lot of these different things. And I know it's a lot of information every week, but general versus primary, just to kind of, kind of refresh our memories. Well, these definitions can vary considerably from one theory to the next. The ability to learn in a general way is the ability to acquire and retain knowledge. So general knowledge is the knowledge of the ability to take good tests and score well on them. So the SAT, ACT, that measures, according to one theorist, if you want to, I jot down a name, Charles Spearman. He's a British psychologist. So Spearman was the one that coined the idea of general intelligence. And again, general intelligence refers to our ability to pass tests and do well on them. And it was numerically expressed, our ability to, with an IQ score, that kind of thing. For our primary mental abilities, we have psychologist Louis Thurstone. And he offered a theory, a different theory of intelligence. And he viewed intelligence as a signal general ability. So he believed people were intelligent based on their ability to verbally comprehend, verbally express what they understood, their ability to reason and make decisions, how fast they could do it. Math and language arts was part of it, but also the idea of seeing and understanding something visually, and of course with memory. So he kind of took into account kind of the whole brain versus just the mathematical or analytical part of the brain. Howard Gardner, we talked about multiple intelligences, the ability that we have visual intelligence, verbal, bodily, musical, intrapersonal, interpersonal, logical, again, different types of ways of learning. And we have a couple of other philosophers or psychologists we can get into, but for the time being, I mean, Gardner and the idea of primary by Thurstone and Charles Spearman with general intelligence. Those are the guys that coined these terms here on this slide. And then finally, our learning styles. We've all done learning styles inventories, personality differences. We have the field, different cognitive styles, and different ways of learning. And of course, our personality, which we'll do our Myers-Briggs, I think it's next week, and our ability to, that our personality determines a lot of how we learn. So essentially, just mind, personality, and our five senses, are all intermixed in the idea of adult learning. Okay, so the last thing, oh, wait, I didn't mean on. Let me go ahead and, sorry about that. So that was it for the content for this evening. Let me just go over this last slide, and then I'll open it up for Q&A for those of you that have any questions regarding the content for tonight. Next week, the 13th, Barry University has asked that there are no, it's a special day at Barry, it's an institutional day, and they've asked that we do not have any assignments, formal assignments or meetings or anything done that day at all, the 13th. So since next week, there's two possibilities. I wanted to run it by you guys. I'll put it on, since a lot of students aren't here tonight, I'll go ahead and create a doodle to see what the class wants to do. But since it's a lot of next week is going to be a review of a lot of the names that we talked about between last week and tonight, I could do a pre-recorded session and then hold a follow-up Q&A, at some other day regarding that particular session. Or we can just hold a session on that Tuesday, the 12th at 9 p.m. instead. So again, either way is fine with me. It's going to be a review largely of what we're doing this week. But, I can do it as a pre-recorded with a Q&A follow-up on a different day. We'll book an hour, however long. Or we can do it on that Tuesday. So I'll create a doodle for everybody, and I'll set it off as an in-and announcement so you guys can take a vote. And we'll do whatever the class decides. And if it's half and half, we'll figure out. We'll flip a coin. And then for module 3, theories of thinking and learning, again, we're going to review a lot of the concepts from module 1, 2, and then this week. And then the third module does focus on HRD, thinking and learning and practices. And that pretty much sums it up for me. I'm going to go ahead and exit the slide presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing. And I'll open it up to you guys for questions. Okay, so Marie, I see your question in the chat box. I was second guessing if the choices I picked were teaching methods. Let me revisit your assignment, and then maybe I can, we can either, I'll send you an email, or if we wanna, maybe we can chat after tonight, like the class, after everybody's done, we can stay on. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording at this point.